What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get a city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1027 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. StickerU.com. Create custom stickers, labels, tattoos, and decals for your home and your business. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. And Canna Cabana. The lowest prices on cannabis. Guaranteed. Over 100 stores across the country. Learn more at cannacabana.com. Joining me this week, making his Toronto Mike debut, is Spider Jones.
Spider Jones, look at him rolling bones, rise along. He can lick anybody in the room that's well groomed to sing the same old song all day long. And his hair ain't too long. I tell you, sister, Mr. Spider Jones. Spider Jones.
Spider, welcome to Toronto Mic'd.
Hey, how you doing? Glad to be here.
What is the origin of this name Spider Jones? Is it the song by The News?
No, not really. It's funny. The name actually started when I was about 2 or 3 years old because I didn't learn to walk very quickly. So they started calling me Spider because I was on the floor crawling. And so when I was young, they said I acted like a spider. So I got the name like that. But then when I came to Toronto and began to box back in the early 60s, I had a boxing match at the, I believe it was at the Coliseum at the exhibition grounds in Toronto. And of course, Sully Sullivan, who was a matchmaker and he ran Sully's gym, saw me after the fight and said, "You gotta cut that name out, Charles. It doesn't sound like a fight name." I said, "Well, that's the name my mother gave me." He said, "Well, we're gonna have to change that. You got to get a name that's flamboyant." And so he said, I said, "Well, I told my mother they used to call me Spider." He said, "That's a good name," because there was a few fighters back in the day. There was Spider Ellsworth Webb, who was a pretty good fighter, and then there was another Canadian fighter named Spider Armstrong. So I've got the name Spider, and it stuck with me.
Well, I love it. Now, Spider, we moved you from your Zoom microphone to the phone, and now I'm wondering, is there any way you could actually hold it like a phone? Because I just want to get you a little bit louder, because I don't want anyone to miss a syllable.
Okay, how's that?
Oh, better.
Is that any better?
That is better.
Okay, good. Okay.
And you can still hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Now, when I mentioned to people that Spider Jones was making his Toronto Mike debut, yes, Cambria wanted to know how you got that name, and there we got the story there. I thought I had decided in my head it was from that song from the 60s, Spider Jones, but you gave us the origin story. But then I got variations of questions.
Wait a minute. You said there's a song from the 60s called Spider Jones?
Yeah, it's called Mr. Spider Jones.
Wow, I never knew that.
1967. I played it off the top there. It's by a band called The News.
I heard it.
Yeah. So
1967 was probably about 30 years before I was born.
well, look, my
No,
math
I'm
can't be
joking.
that. I know my math can't be that bad. Come on, Spider. But so I decided, oh, he's named after, and I didn't know about the song till I did a little, I searched YouTube and then I found that song, and it's like a bit obscure, but it's a great jam. Like, it's just such a
Yeah.
coincidence. Such a
I
coincidence.
may steal it and start using it. I didn't know it was there, but thank you for that.
That's your entrance music now. But then I kept getting variations of this question. Rodriguez said, can you ask him if the bacon is still shaken? And then El Grego wanted me to ask you what's shaken. And then, of course, we'll get to your radio career soon. But I remember you'd always say, what's shaken but the bacon? So where did that come from? Was that just something you said? What's shaken but the bacon?
I picked up. Well, it was actually ain't nothing shaken but the bacon, but it's already taken. I used to, people would say, hey, Spider, what's up? What's up? When they'd phone into my all-night show when I was on the Fenton 590. And,
right.
Of course, we had a lot of fun with that show. And I still get a lot of people that were young back then. And because I allowed everybody through. There were some of the radio talk show hosts and personalities. They limited their calls to people that were of a certain age, but with me, I didn't care if you were 12 or 13. These were hockey fans, baseball fans, boxing fans, and they wanted to talk. And I always, my producers back then, George Strombolopoulos and of course Jeff Merrick and Todd Hayes, they were all great producers. And we had we let anybody through. And so this, hey, Spider, what's happening? And I'd say, nothing shake about the bacon, but it's already taken. So after a while, they'd call up, and the first thing I'd hear was, hey, Spider, what's shaking? And then if they were a first-time caller, they'd always let me know. So I would give them a first-time caller. I got a phrase from Don King back in the day, was double shot power, double shot power. Double shot power. So I'd give them that. So we had our own little thing which what we called the Nighthawks. It was like they have the Ford Nation, the Leaf Nation, the Have Nation. Well, we had the Nighthawk Nation, and we had and some of those guys were like Ronnie Hawkins and Gordon Lightfoot. You'd be surprised who listened to the Spider's Web, because we went coast to coast like buttered toast every night.
Now, you said double shot power. I used to hear you say that. That's that Don King sample there. And I always thought it was double shock power, SHOCK. But it's double shot
It is
power.
double shock.
Okay.
Double shock power.
I thought,
double
okay,
shock power.
Spider, I thought it was double shock power. But then when I was mentioning you were coming on, people were telling me, no, man, it's shot, SHOT. So, by the way, now, before we get back to those producers you name dropped, because I know all three of those guys. I want to talk about them. But I have a quick piece of audio that's the origin of that phrase from Don King. So this is about 30 seconds, but let's listen to this here.
A Korean or Chinese, a head of martial arts, he says Tyson has double shock power. And so I say, what is double shock power? He explained to me that the man rips punches, don't throw punches. Every part of his body is like Marishnikov, or whatever his name is, Marishnikov, that they can take their finger and knock you out. Double shock power. The people's champion, Mike Tyson, double shock power.
So there's the origin, double shock power.
Well, I had Don King say that for me into a microphone when he was here for a convention back in the 90s. It was the World Boxing Association, or one of them.
Right.
He was here with Felix Trinidad and, of course, the White Buffalo, who was a fighter from South Africa, Franz Botha. And I got to hang with them on different occasions. So one day I said, Don, say that in the microphone. I want to use it. So it became something everybody wanted. Hit me, Spider, hit me. So double shot power. And then they'd become a Nighthawk. And many of them got T-shirts. We had T-shirts made that had the Nighthawk on them, a picture of a picture of a hawk on them, and then it says the Spider's Nighthawks on the fan 590.
Wow.
was a great time in my life. We had so much fun.
Now, okay, so we are going to step back to get you there, and then we're going to go beyond. But let me ask you about this.
Let me tell you a story first.
Please.
Can I? Because this is funny. Because when I was up, I worked the all-night shift. I'd go on from 12 to 5. And Storm and Norman would come on, and I'd go on after Storm and Norman. And, of course, we went coast to coast. And one day I was all gassed up, and, man, I just had to, let one go. I'm just saying straight up. And and I said, George Strombolopoulos, I said, Georgie, take us to a break because I got if I don't, it's going to kill me. So George says, okay. He said, go ahead, into my microphone. So, okay, I said, okay, 1:35, quick break. When we come back, we got Jim in Mississauga, we got so-and-so in Calgary and so-and-so up next. But first of all, these messages here on the Spider's Web on the Fan 590. And then the light went out on the mic, so I knew I was safe. So I let one go like you wouldn't believe. And then I looked over to say something to George. He was on the other side of the glass. And I couldn't see him. And I said, what the hell is going on? And then I looked back at my microphone, and it was on all that time. And George was on the floor rolling over. He was roaring and roaring. I said, what happened? He said, man, you just farted coast to coast. And every single microphone in the place lit up. People were just, that was, for that night, that was the whole thing. It's just crazy show.
So let me.
But that's what radio personalities were like back then.
Well, first of all, it's exciting. There was a live late night show in the city, and I've had Storm and Norman Rumack on before, and we've talked about the late night vampires, but the Spider's Web. So let me just start. There's lots of ground to cover. This is awesome. But did you have any inkling that George Strombolopoulos, your producer, board op, whatever his role was there on your late night, show on the Fan 590, any clue he was going to be something very special in the Canadian media landscape?
Yeah, I did, because you have to understand George he's highly intelligent, very smart. Back then, I think because he had he had more bling in his face than the hustlers on Woodward Avenue in Detroit. I mean, George had an earring in his nose, an earring in his ear, long hair. But I tell you one thing about George Strombolopoulos, was extremely intelligent, and he knew a lot about sports. Between him and Jeff Merrick, I don't know how many times those guys saved me, because I'd have one in one ear and Merrick in one ear and George in another ear. You got to understand, these guys were young, but they were sharp. And so what George didn't know, George knew his hockey as well as anyway. He knew basketball, and he knew football. And of course, Jeff Merrick, he was really up on sports, but he knew his hockey, even the minor level. So people assumed that I was a genius. I knew all this stuff, but it was these two guys around me that made me look good all the time. So I'm not surprised by either. And they're very bright young men and intelligent, and they know a lot about sports, much more than they're given credit for. So I could see them being, and that's the reason I always gave them an open line on my show. Within the Spider's Web, I had George on a lot. He had his own show within my show, and I also did the same with guys like Barry Davis, who went on to work with the Jays, and of course Eric Smith, who went on to be one of the voices of the Raptors. Just great. So much talent on that station. Howard Berger back then, and Mike Hogan, and of course Storm and Norman, and these guys were all, Elliot Friedman. We all worked together. So it was we had a lot of talent back then.
What a special time, really, that this crew, and you mentioned Barry Davis was with the Blue Jays for many years, and Eric Smith is still covering Raptors. He's been with Rogers for, I think, over 25 years. Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick are two of the, they're two of the biggest hockey insiders and analysts on Rogers Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. And, of course, George Strombolopoulos is Strombo. So it's just what an unbelievable legacy that these youngsters came through the halls of the Fan 590 and went on to such amazing things. That's quite something.
And Dan Shulman.
Right.
The list goes on. I had a chance to work with all those guys: Tom Cheek, Jerry Hallworth, Don Cherry. Everybody worked at the Fan back then. We had so much fun, and of course you had Bob McCowan. And look, it was a wonderful time. I had no idea that would happen to me. I mean, I had started out at CHWO in Oakville, which is now Zoomer. And back then I did a show from 10 o'clock to 2 in the morning, and it was a You Say We Play show. It was a spider's web, and it was a show where we like to say we brought the nitty-gritty back to the city, playing all those great songs. And I had access to the Royal York because the booking agent in Canada for Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and Tina Turner and the Temptations and all those groups was Gino Empri. And he was the booking agent for the Imperial Room at the Royal York, and the maitre d' was a guy named Louis Janetta. So they always got me interviews with these guys. And so that was great, So I'd have them on my show, and I'd play all this great music. And I always believed in interaction. You don't get enough of that today. That's why I say the day of the great radio personality is gone. The live shows where they had a chance to be part of the show.
So why is that era gone? Like, is it simply cookie cutting to save $1 by corporate?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is, and that's why you've lost so many great personalities. I grew up on people like Alan Freed, who was a great radio person. He's the guy that coined the phrase rock and roll,
right.
And he influenced me. People like Wolfman Jack, and then Martha Jean, the Queen out of Detroit. And they had another guy in Detroit called Frantic Ernie Durham, and this guy was nuts. That's why I called him Frantic Ernie Durham. And they had Joe Howard. And so, there were so many of them here in Toronto too. Jungle Jay Nelson, and they had all these great radio jocks. But of course, when people draw viewers or draw an audience, they deserve to be paid. But with these big corporations taking over now, they just squeeze $1 and they forget about these personalities. So I haven't actually listened to Canadian radio in years. I find that you have to go to the internet or go to a satellite to get these great radio personalities. They just don't have them anymore. And I know people get on me for saying that, but it's the truth.
They're podcasting now.
Right? They're podcasting. Yeah, they're podcasting, and people got to read from a script, or they all sound alike. Yeah. It's like an old boys club. It just, people love personalities.
Spider, you're riling me up, buddy. You're getting me agitated over here. Okay, so I actually thought you started in radio at Fan 590, but it sounds like you started at, what was the name of the station? Now it's Zoomer. What was it?
CHWO, Oakville, Ontario.
Okay.
All that glitters is gold.
So here, we're going to take a little trip here to get you there, okay? Because all that glitters is gold. I love it. I want to find out a little more about Spider Jones before we get you into Toronto radio here. I want to read a note I got, though, from Mackay Taggart. He wrote and said, when I said Spider Jones was coming on, Mackay wrote, he's a legend and the first radio host I ever had the chance to produce for. So Mackay's with Global News right now. And you remember working with Mackay?
Oh, absolutely. Mackay was so smart. He was going to make it. Very intelligent, sharp. Yeah, I really enjoyed working with Ty. I wish it was longer. But you know what happens to these guys?
What?
They get good.
Right.
And they move on, and you lose them. Like my first producer, when I first started in radio at CHWO, I had it was vinyl then. I had to set it up, make the phone calls, and operate. I did everything on my own. When I went over to the Fan 590, Bob Bakowitz brought me over there. Wasn't looking to be a talk show host, but he liked my personality, and whenever I got my first one was Todd Hayes, who went on to become the executive producer of Off the Record.
Yes.
Whenever these guys, they got good, somebody would take them. And you can't blame them because they got better offers. The same thing happened to Strombopoulos. He went over to Much Music.
No. And then, first he went to 102.1, The Edge.
Yes.
Because I remember.
That's right. But
right.
but these guys
Yeah.
were so talented.
Right.
And so they got these opportunities. So I was always going through producers. That's the unless you can pay them the great money as Bob McCowan's show could. You wouldn't dare take his producer away. He was the godfather of Canadian sports talk radio. So he had guys like Mike DeMurgis, who went on now, who's a professor now in up in at a university in New York, and does a lot of work with Fox Network. So, a lot of guys came through that door. But no, it was CHWO and then the Fan 590. And I wasn't looking to go to the Fan 590. I'm not a jock sniffer. That's what I call a lot of them. I mean, they live their life in sports. But I was more, music's my opium. But the money was right and the exposure was great.
There's a gentleman named Steve Hillier, I want to say. I hope I pronounced his last name right. But he wrote me and said, just tell him this kid from Quantrell still remembers him. It's great to see what he's doing now. Quantrell. What's Quantrell? Do you know?
That's the street, Quantrell.
Okay. Quantrell. Okay.
That is out in Melbourne, and I lived in Melbourne for 13 years, and I got to know all the young people, like Farley Flex, who became the one of the judges for Canadian Idol back then.
Sure.
These guys all came out of Melbourne. And so, he's right. When I was there, I was going to school and studying to be, I went back to school because that was my dream from the time I was 10 years old, Mike. I wanted to be in radio. It just took me a long time to get there because I didn't have a game plan. I had the passion, but I didn't have the game plan or the self-confidence to believe it would happen. Because as you know, the radio business is basically it's white male dominated, and I say that not to bitch or complain, but I didn't see very few people of color, especially on the Canadian scene, and so I didn't feel like I had a shot, and I didn't really go after it. And then when I did go after it, it took a while to get there, but I was living out in Melbourne and still working with training kids how to box and trying to keep them out of trouble. I always tried to keep them away from the things that got me in trouble.
Well, listen, we're going to get to this boxing here, but first, a little wrestling, because Adrian heard you were coming on, and he wrote me and said, was he good friends with Abdullah the Butcher and Sweet Daddy Siki? Also, when did he start using his signature phrase? You've already covered this, but he also wanted to know about, ain't nothing shaking but the bacon.
Abdullah the Butcher's real name was Larry Shreve, and I grew up with him in Windsor. And he got me my first job shining shoes when we were kids. He was a couple of years older than me. And then he ended up studying karate. Like, he had a black belt. And then he got into wrestling. And I think he went out west and worked with Stu Hart for a while. And then from there, moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where he lives now. And he made a lot of money. He made a famous name. And then there was the other one you mentioned. There was another name. Sweet Daddy Siki was a big role model for me. He used to come to Sully's gym every Sunday afternoon and sit on the bench and watch. Just watch quietly.
Wow.
Never said too much. And then after I trained, he would come over and give me advice, or we'd talk, and we became friends. Sweet Daddy Siki is a great man. I saw him about 2 or 3 months ago. Yeah.
So another gentleman
great role model.
Awesome. I when I mentioned on Twitter that Spider Jones.
I want to mention another guy too, Rocky Johnson, who Dwayne The Rock's father was a good friend of mine, and he came up from Nova Scotia about the same time as I came up from Windsor, and he boxed for a while. That's where he got his movement from. But he, for some reason, got into wrestling, went down the street from Sully's to Mac's gym, and he trained there. And I tell you, he was cut. He had a lot of moves. He was a great athlete. And then next thing I know, he's on television wrestling and went on to have a great career.
He played in the CFL as well, right?
Not Rocky.
No? Okay.
No, The Rock did, but his father, the Rock played in the CFL. His father never played
Gotcha.
football. He wrestled.
Gotcha. Now, when, again, I mentioned you're coming on Toronto Mike, and then I get a phone call. I'm on a bike ride, okay? This is yesterday. I'm on a bike ride. My phone rings, so I press a button on my headphones to answer it, but I don't see the number or anything. And I get a guy pretending to be you going, Toronto Mike, and I won't, well, I'll try. I'll give you Spider Jones. Like, it's pretending to be you. By the way, are you comfortable with me saying Spider Jones that way? Spider Jones.
Everybody does it. Listen, that's a compliment to me because John Moore, my buddy, he works for RB. He did the morning show, and he used to do that all the time. That's a compliment when people do that.
Well, good, because I actually purposely didn't do it in the intro because I didn't know whether that would be insulting on any level, but I absolutely mean it with love, and I have difficulty saying Spider Jones. I need to say Spider Jones. So, okay. So I'm on this bike ride, and the phone, it goes...
Listen, that's flattering. When people will do that, I'm humbled that
okay.
they do things. But John Moore does it. He's just one of the best at it, and another one is John Oakley. They love to it means they know who you are.
Right. So I'm this person, and I can tell it's not you. Okay, because it's kind of an imitation of you, and it's like Toronto Mike is Spider Jones, and I realized very quickly that this is FOTM Perry Lefko. Okay, and
my buddy Perry Lefko. Oh God.
Well, okay. So the specific question, and then you can talk about Perry because he's listening right now. But he wants me to ask you, why did you decide to call his wife Jane by the formal nickname Lady Jane?
Because she's the essence of a woman. Lady Jane's a beautiful woman, but she's beautiful in so many ways. And he's not Tarzan, that's for darn sure. But I owe a lot to Perry Lefko. I got to tell you a story. When I wrote my first book, Out of the Darkness, it was selling fairly well, but not as much as I wanted to do. I get a call from Perry Lefko. He does a book review on it. Puts it in the Toronto Sun, and my sales just quadrupled. Wow. And I've always respected Perry Lefko as a writer and as a really good human being, and his wife too. They're just wonderful people. So I'm the man of nicknames. I nicknamed Elliot Friedman the Fridge, the Fridge. I name him Strombo. I name these guys all kinds of different names because I have affection for them. And that's why I named his wife that. I did some gigs where she was part of the events coordinator, and they did a wonderful job. She's a great lady. That's why.
Awesome. Now he says that the Lefkos and Spider go back a long way. He tells me so. Good stuff.
Absolutely.
Hey, a WMM on Twitter says, I think he's from Windsor. What are his memories of hockey and boxing at the old Windsor Arena, affectionately known as the Barn?
Wow. Yeah, Windsor Arena. I remember so many good things about the Windsor Arena. You know, in 1958, and I was about 12 or 13 years old, I saw Buddy Holly and the Crickets there. Not the Crickets. Buddy Holly was without him then. Okay. I saw Frankie Lyman. I saw Little Richard and Windsor. I used to follow the Windsor Bulldogs. And they used to have some great matches with the Chatham Maroons and the Whitby Dunlaps. A lot of fights back then. They dropped the gloves. And I remember the captain of the Windsor Bulldogs, Lou Bendo. He sold real estate on the side. And they had a guy from the Chatham Maroons called Gord Haiti, and he was a tough guy. And they were always getting into it. But I have some good memories of Windsor. We had a lot of fun going to that place, roller skating there every Sunday evening, and then I'd go to Chatham on Sunday, Windsor on I believe Saturday, Chatham on Sunday, and through the week I'd go to the Arcadia in Detroit. Everybody loved to roller skate back then in Windsor, but the Windsor Arena, a lot of great memories there. The Windsor Spitfires, and a friend of mine, Kirk Scott, who's from Windsor, trained Bobby Probert and Joe Kosher how to fight. Wow. So a lot of things like that I'll never forget.
All right. So speaking of fighting, please tell us a little bit. Those of us who are listening and only know you as a radio personality and as an inspirational speaker, is it correct that you're a 3-time Golden Glove champion?
Well, yeah. Well, you know what? Everything was Golden Gloves back then, so it's not like it was a big deal. And I've been the Golden Gloves. Everybody fought in the Golden Gloves. I fought first of all novice Golden Gloves, and then twice open class Golden Gloves. Yeah. I boxed. I started boxing when I was about 11, 12 years old. My father made me box because everybody was beating me up. I wasn't a tough kid coming up. I want to be everybody's friend, but we live in a pretty tough part of the city, and so I had to learn how to fight. But and boxing was something. It became a lifestyle for me, not a profession. I didn't have that kind of passion. I think. Because people ask me why I didn't go pro or why I didn't stick. I think I had moderately good skills, but I didn't have that kind of passion. You can call it heart, they can call it whatever they want, but a boxer to be successful has to be able to sacrifice his body because it's very punishing, not just your body, your mind. And that just wasn't me. That is a lifestyle. I liked it. Competitively, I enjoyed it, but I didn't fight like a lot of the guys I grew up with were fighting 40, 50 times a year as amateurs. And I can tell you, most of the guys I grew up with that are amateur and turned pro have what they call pugilistic dementia now. And they've died long before they should have. I'm glad now I didn't. And I'm a big fight fan. Boxing opened a lot of doors for me, but I wouldn't boast about my career.
But you're in the.
I had the chance to spar with a lot of good fighters and move around with a lot of good fighters, and it opened a lot of doors for me.
Sure. Well, we're going to talk about one great fighter in a moment, but just to let everybody know, you're in the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame. You were inducted in 1996.
But I want to clear that too, because I can tell you there's a lot of petty stuff out here, and there's a lot of people that are in the Hall of Fame for boxing. They shouldn't be. And when I was inducted to the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame, it is a ring announcer and a journalist, not as a fighter.
Right.
And I wouldn't take it if they gave it to me. I didn't accomplish that much. Just because you win the Golden Gloves does not make you a Hall of Famer. There are people in the Hall of Fame that deserve to be there, like Clyde Gray and Donovan Boucher and Sean O'Sullivan and George Chavallo. I mean, these guys deserve to be there. Colin Fraser, and the list goes on, but I'm certainly not one of them.
I'm glad you clarified that, and it's worth also noting that you were once voted the boxing commentator and MC of the year. So it's more on that side of the coin that you're that made you worthy of our Boxing Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and I like to think because of the fact that I did box and did a lot of sparring, I understood that part of the game,
right.
The physical part of the game. There are guys that are boxing writers today, and I got to be honest, man, they don't know a left hook from a fish hook. Uh-huh. And the only ring you ever seen is the one around their bathtub. But they gain notoriety from other people that are writers, and that's. They're now starting, as you notice, you'll see now, they're using boxers like Roy Jones and Lennox Lewis. And for years, they didn't do that. They had all these other commentators. Some of them were great. I loved Howard Cosell. He's one of the greats. And I like Larry Merchant and, some of those guys. But there are some of them out there that really never fought. There's another guy, Al Bernstein, one of the best.
Yeah, I mean, I remember listening to, speaking of the Fan 590, I would hear, let's say, Stephen Brunt would be co-hosting Primetime Sports at Bob McCowan, and Burt Randolph, Burt Sugar Randolph would come on and talk boxing, and it was just fantastic.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Hilarious, too, yeah. I had many conversations with Burt over the years, the late Burt Sugar. Right. I mean, this guy had boxing knowledge. He spent his whole life around the game, though. This guy was in the gym watching the fighters, but he was. I don't know if he ever fought himself, but I'll tell you one thing: he knew the game, and the fighters all liked him, respected him.
Now, you've talked about some great fighters, but let's talk about the greatest for a moment. Okay, let's be very clear exactly, because I went to a few sources, and I was reading about how you were a member of Muhammad Ali's training camp back when he was fighting the aforementioned George Chuvalo. Can you just tell us exactly how do you end up as a member of Muhammad Ali's training camp, and what was your relationship like with the greatest?
Well, first of all, I wasn't a traveling member of his camp. He came to Toronto. I'll tell you the story. I'm working out. It's 1966, and I'm working out at the gym, Sully's gym. It was on Ossington at the time, above Bart's Collision, and they'd have the old. It was one of them old gyms you see in a Damon Runyon movie. You know, all the big posters and photographs of all the great Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Patterson, Willie Pep, Sandy Sadler, Archie Moore, Rocky Marciano, all of them. And I'm skipping one day, and at that particular time, because I was living at the gym, I just gotten out of Millbrook, and I was living at the gym doing some work around the gym for Sully, keeping the place clean. It was just in between. I had nothing back then, and the phone rings off the wall, and I answered it. It was a guy named Donnie Album out of Erie, Pennsylvania, who was the manager of Johnny Bizzarro. There's a couple Bizzarro. They're called Bizzarro. They were boys out of Erie, Pennsylvania, but he was also doing work for Don King, and he asked for Sully. And so Sully came to the phone, and a few minutes later, he says, "You know who's coming to town?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Who?" I says, "Muhammad Ali." He says, "How do you know?" He says to me, "Look," I said, "I just heard you talking on the phone about it. The fact that Ali was supposed to fought Ernie Terrell in Montreal, and that couldn't go through. And so they decided to have the fight in Toronto, which is the reason Conn Smythe left the board of directors, because he saw Muhammad Ali as a draft dodger. He said, if he fights at Madison Square Garden, I will leave the board of directors. And he did.
Oh, you mean Maple Leaf Gardens?
So Muhammad, go ahead.
Oh, you said Madison Square Gardens, but you mean Maple Leaf Gardens.
Maple Leaf Gardens.
Right.
Yeah, you got me there. So at any rate, a couple of weeks later, Muhammad Ali arrives in Toronto. So that's how I got to be part of the camp, because he held his training camp there. But I did not, I don't know how things get in the press. I did not prepare him for he had his own training staff. I had a chance to get in the ring and move with him. I call it sparring. I was sparring, but let's get it straight. He was just playing around. He could have took me out in 10 seconds, as George Chuvalo could have, and yet I sparred many rounds with George Chuvalo. Wow. But that's how I got to meet Muhammad Ali, and because we both liked music, I remember I was in the dressing room one day after a training session. I started singing "Stand By Me," and he joined in. Wow. And then we started talking about music, and I said to him, I told him who his favorite singer was. His favorite singer was Sam Cooke. And then, but he was surprised that he knew so much about Sam Cooke, about Benny King, about Otis Redding, and about all these great singers. And I told him, I said, "Yeah, I'd like to get into radio one day." He said, "Man, you should be in radio." He said, "Man, I was born to be the heavyweight champion of the world. You were born to be the heavyweight champion of the airwaves. Why ain't you in radio?" And I told him the same thing I told you earlier. I said, "Man, ain't no black people in radio." And there wasn't at the time, certainly not in Toronto or in Canada. And he said, "Man, if Jackie Robinson thought like you, if Jackie Robinson thought like that, there wouldn't be nobody in baseball." He said, and he also said, "If Jack Johnson would have thought like you, there wouldn't have been no black heavyweight champion of the world," and all this stuff. And he said, "You want something bad enough, you got to go out and fight for it." So I got to know him, through that, and I ran into him at other things and had a chance to interview him a couple of times. Wow. But he never forget who you are. I remember my son sitting in his lap, and I remember him meeting my wife and me a couple times. Meeting her, and I went out to dinner with him and his crew a few times. So, I mean, that's how it was. And he promised me that when I became a radio broadcaster, that he would let me introduce him. Interview him. But what's funny about him is,
what?
I really couldn't get it until I climbed in the ring with him and looked at and his speed. It was electrifying. I mean, for a guy 6'3.5", 215 pounds, his hands were like blurs coming at you, but he never tried to hurt me. That was the difference between Muhammad Ali and most other sparring partners.
Wow.
He never went to war that much in sparring sessions.
Well, that speech he gave you is so inspiring. I'm ready to run through a wall right now, Spider. Like that's quite the inspirational speech, telling you to stick it out. The Jackie Robinson speech, stick it out in radio. You know, because
I never forgot that, because I use Muhammad Ali when I talk to young people about a metaphor. Boxing is a metaphor for life. Life can be a challenge. You can have your ups and downs. But the great champions, no matter who they are, whether it's Marciano, whether it's Joe Louis, whether it's Sugar Ray Leonard, whether it was Duran, they got up off the canvas, they got knocked down, they got back up and into the fight. And that's what life is all about. And Muhammad Ali told me that when you want something bad enough, you fight for it. I never forgot that.
Wow. Okay. Now, do you know the sports journalist Gare Joyce?
Say that name again?
Gare Joyce. So I guess his real name is Gary, but he goes by Gare. He writes for Sportsnet. He's a sports journalist who writes. He's a great writer, to be honest, but not a lot of name recognition.
Yeah. What you're talking about? Yes.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. He loves boxing. He has a couple of like Ontario boxing questions that only you can answer these, Spider. So I'm going to hit you with a few here from Gare. He goes, I always wanted to know why George Chuvalo had trouble with Bob Clareau. Is that right? Bob Clareau? Am I saying
Bobby
that?
Clareau.
Clareau. Okay. Who was a pretty good heavyweight. I think he made it into the ring's top 10 one month, but was just outside of it most of the time. Given that he was from Montreal, I'm sure he was mob connected or something else. Not really a lot out there about their fights. So he wants, so maybe, what can you say about why Bob Clareau would give George Chuvalo so much trouble?
I remember Bobby Clareau. He's a big guy from Montreal. And he was top 10 for more than a couple months. He was in the top 10. I think he beat George 2 out of 3 times, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
I think George beat him once. But Bobby was a big, strong, tough guy like George. But he was bigger, taller, and maybe a little better mover. But those fights could have went either way.
Wow.
I mean, I think in all Canadian history, George Chuvalo might have been the greatest heavyweight champion our country ever had. And we've had some pretty good ones. But Bobby Clareau would be number 2.
Wow.
That's how good he was. He was a tough guy, too. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But Montreal's had some great fighters, out of Montreal. And I'll tell you, Montreal, they treat their fighters. George never got the kind of recognition here he should have got. And I know, even as an amateur fighting in Montreal, that people treat you like a star.
Wow.
Totally different atmosphere, totally different environment.
Here's another name for you. Ask Spider Jones about Baldy Chard. Former boxer, Ontario amateur champ, street fighter, bouncer. Do you know this name, Baldy Chard?
Very, very well. First time I met Baldy, I was fighting at the Lansdowne Boxing Club. I fought a guy named Carl Caruso. And believe me, that fight, Carl and I went beyond the rules. So bad that we fell right out of the ring and kept going. Harry Davis, the referee, broke us up and was going to just eliminate both of us. Was going to suspend us both. Excuse me. What happened was, excuse me, I'm sorry about that.
Hey, no problem.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
What happened was, here this guy comes rushing in and pulls Harry away from it. Let these son of a go. This is the best fight we've had here in a long time. That was my first introduction to Baldy Chard, who I got to know very well after. Baldy is one of the, if not the toughest guy I ever met. He was only about 5'8", built like a I mean, the shoulders and the neck. I mean, this guy was as tough as they got. But I always talked about how feared he was. But be honest with you, I always we got along very well. Maybe I'm thankful for that. But he was a fixture in the fight game because he was an ex-fighter and a very, very tough guy.
See, Garrett's bringing the heat with his questions. I love it. But
I would like to see him he could have fought Butterbean.
Wow.
That's the kind of tough ball he was.
Wow. Now, Eric wants to know your opinion on this. He says, will boxing ever come close to the popularity it once had, or has the sport been swallowed up by the mixed martial arts organizations like UFC?
I don't think boxing will ever see, not the way it's going today. Good fighters won't fight each other as they used to. We were so spoiled. In the 50s, we had Sugar Ray Robinson and Archie Moore and Rocky Graziano and Rocky Marciano, Kid Gavilan. Then you went in the 70s, you had Muhammad Ali. In the 60s, you had George Foreman, Joe Frazier, Larry Holmes. You had Marvin Hagler, Alexis Arguello. We're not going to see that anymore. We're not going to see those great fights. Those guys didn't duck each other. These guys today, I'll tell you the truth, I find them boring. Boring as hell. So I don't think we're ever going to see that era where we had Archie Moore and Sugar Ray Robinson and all these guys. You're not going to see it. It's not just because of martial arts. It's because you no longer see them built up on TV and free TV. They want to charge you for everything. So you don't get to see these guys fight. And then after they fight for so long, what happens is you know who they are.
Right.
You've watched them evolve. That's not happening today.
Now, Spider, before I get you back to radio, because I have a bunch of radio questions, but you mentioned just in passing, as you were talking about, you mentioned Millbrook. Why the stop at Millbrook?
Well, I was a bad boy. Let's just put it that way. I started getting in trouble when I was young, which is one of the reasons that I do a lot of work for the Department of Correctional Services now and going to prisons. And that's another reason I have my Spider's Web Youth Empowerment Center, because I got in a lot of trouble as a young man, and along with my brothers and other friends. And, sometimes the company we keep, I'm not going to blame them. I knew what I was doing. But so Millbrook is a maximum security reformatory for people who are 2 years less a day. So I spent some time there. When I got out in February, I had nowhere else to go. I ended up going to Sully's Gym because I decided I didn't want to go back to jail anymore. So it was kind of tough. I was in the streets for about a week and then almost froze to death living in the back of an old bread truck. And I finally approached Sully, and he let me stay at the gym and told me I could, if I kept the gym clean, the locker rooms clean, and I could stay there until I got on my feet. And that's how I met Muhammad Ali, at the gym.
Wow. This inspiring episode of Toronto Mic'd with Spider Jones is proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery. Free delivery in the GTA. Go to greatlakesbeer.com. Find them in LCBOs across this fine province. Speaking of delicious stuff in this fine province, palmapasta.com. Order your delicious Palma pasta food from this amazing independent Italian eatery and retail store in Mississauga and Oakville. I love my Palma pasta. StickerU.com, they make up the Toronto Mike stickers I love to give to guests, and all the decals on my back wall. Quality stuff by good people right here in Liberty Village, but available anywhere you've got an internet connection. Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. Brad Jones has a new podcast called Life's Undertaking. Subscribe, enjoy. It's been great working with Brad on that project. And Canna Cabana, they won't be undersold on cannabis or cannabis accessories. There are over 100 locations across this fine country. Go to cannacabana.com, become a member of the Cabana Club. Be the first in the know when there's a deal going down, and there's always a deal going down. Shout out to Canna Cabana. And now back to Spider Jones. Hearing that story, you hit hard times. You went to prison, but that somebody gave you a chance, and you picked yourself up off the mat, and you decided that you were gonna clean yourself up and look at the inspiration you become yourself. Like, this is a fantastic story. So good on you.
Yeah, but I think I can identify or sort of relate to people that get in trouble, and it happens sometimes. I grew up in a very poor. We were very poor. There was 9 children, and we lived in a 2-bedroom bungalow, which had no insulation hardly. So it was really tough. And the first time I ever slept in my own bed was when I went to jail. There were 4 or 5 who slept in one bed. And I mean, that's the way it was. And we were bedwetters. So you know what I'm talking about. You go to, you're in that bed, man. And then somebody pees the bed, and that whole mattress turns into a war zone.
Wow. Everybody
fighting for a dry spot. I think I might have invented the first water bed. I don't know. But, we grew up that way. We didn't have much growing up. And so, I mean, I grew up around hustlers and drug dealers and pimps. And I got to be honest with you, they were just kings of the street. They drove the nice cars. They had a pocket full of green, beautiful women, sharp clothes. I wanted to be like that. I didn't even think of the ramifications back then. Because you think of instant gratification. I want that nice suit. I want that pocket full of green. I want that beautiful woman. And so I started doing all these crazy things like stealing and got in with a bad crowd that kept encouraging me. Hey man, you're this and that. You're going to be a great thief. I remember the greatest compliment I ever had as a young man when I was about 13 years old. Was when I gave a guy some stolen jewelry. He said, "Man, you're gonna be a great thief one day." Wow. And I worked on it. You love them streets, but I got to tell you, Mike, the streets don't love you back.
Well, again, you mentioned it, but I'm going to remind people that Out of the Darkness, this is your inspirational life story that you wrote, and it talks about this, like growing up in the inner city projects of Detroit and Windsor, and basically like the story like you described, and then eventually finding yourself having a conversation with the greatest, Muhammad Ali, who's basically inspiring you to stick with your dreams of radio. And then eventually, we're going to get to it in a minute, but just thank you for writing Out of the Darkness. People have got to track this down. It's very inspirational.
That book took me years to write. It was very difficult to write, but it was like a catharsis, you know what I mean? It cleansing. It took me years to write the book, and I was very honest in the book. I talked about all the problems I had over the years and how many friends I lost to street violence, and the book did very well. It's in all the libraries and schools. It was in all the stores, and I'm just finishing off my second book now, which is called The Predator Within. Oh. And that book's going to be, it's a book that I think every mother's child should have, because it talks in layman terms how to turn your life around, how to develop that strong sense of self-worth. If you're worth something, you're not going to go in the streets. Right. Because you'll understand you're worth more than going to prison or dying so young. I see so many people up where my youth center is that have brothers and sisters especially brothers that have been murdered or are doing life in jail for crime. You have to bring them hope, but you also have to inspire them and mentor them. And these are the things that I needed growing up, and I put them in my book. There's no, it's straight up the way it is.
Well, I mean, you walk the walk. I mean, you're a grade 5 dropout. Like, I know some, high school dropouts. I don't know any grade 5 dropout. Like, you dropped out at grade 5, and then you...
Well, I was signed out. My father signed me out of school because I flunked grade 3 and 4. I have a learning disability. I still have it. I just learned how to deal with it. I do not process information at the same speed. So I was basically put in special ed classes growing up. And the rest of the kids called them the ding-dong class. They made fun of us. That made us worse. And so I bought into this after a while. I bought into, hey, you know what? I must be stupid. You keep hearing it. You may not admit it, but underneath, people don't expect much of you, so you don't expect much of yourself. So you believe, to dream to be a radio broadcaster to me was delusional. It was something that I wanted, something I had a passion for, but I never really believed I could cut it. I didn't have what it took. This is what kept me down, because I had no self-worth. I didn't believe I was worth my dream.
And then at the age of 30, you mentioned this earlier, but you're returning to school at the age of 30. 33, and you become an honor student.
Well, you know what? I went back to school because my wife taught me into it. Because I always talked about wanting to be in radio. One day she says, you're going to keep talking like this till you're 6 years, 7 years old. Right. Your dream is to be in radio, and here you are talking about it, but it's not happening. Why don't you do something? Meanwhile, I had all these different jobs. You got to remember, I had no education. My father signed me out of school. I was thieving. I went to prison. I got out, went back to jail, got out, and finally I decided I can't do this anymore. But what can I do? I had no game plan. I had no understanding. You have to have some kind of design. You got to have a map, a roadmap. Where am I going? Where's this taking me? And I had all these different jobs. The last job acted as a catalyst, though, because I was up at Sully's one day, and I was working out, and after I worked out, I always had a cup of green tea, and I would read the paper, and I saw this ad, and it said, disc jockey wanted, West End Lounge, busy West End Lounge. So the next morning I applied for it. I got it right away. And it was a seedy, tough joint. The old Drake House in just out of Parkdale in Toronto. And at this particular time, the people that patronized that place were the hustlers, ex-cons, gangsters, and it was a seedy bunch, and there, a lot of drugs going on. And upstairs, there was a lot of drug dealing going on. At any rate, my first night there, I'm playing the music, and a fight breaks out. The owner comes rushing over and asks me to go break up the fight, and I told him straight up, I'm not here to break up any fights. I'm the disc jockey. He says, listen, if you don't break up this fight, the police are going to come and close us down again. Again? He said, yeah, they close us down, you got no job. I needed the money. Right. So I broke up the fight, got my clothes ripped, breaking it up. A couple nights later, I break up another fight, and it went on. And when it hits me, they got a guy working the door. Now, that's supposed to be the guy that breaks up the fights, the doorman, the bouncer. This guy had pythons for arms, and he had that long hair. He looked like Tarzan. But he was actually a magician. Every time a fight broke out, he disappeared. And he'd leave me to do the fighting. So I finally talked to the boss, and Gino, and had him fired, and I took his job. So now I'm disc jockey / bouncer, doing a job I hated. It got to the point where I didn't even want to go in, because you never know what's going to go down there. People get knifed in there. There are guys in there carrying guns. The police were always raiding the place. It was just the kind of life that I left. The kind of life that I left. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to go back to that. I was living the life that I wanted to get away from for all those years. And one night, I was playing some music, and I heard a couple of screams. And they were coming from the woman's washroom. So I rushed around there, and as I opened the door, I saw this guy, and he was pimp, and he was smacking this girl around. I wrote about it in the book. And when I stopped him, he pulled a straight razor and he cut my wrist. And I worked him over really good with a garbage can. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting in the back of a police cruiser, and they're taking him out on a stretcher. I don't know if he's dead or alive. I don't know what's going on. But it's the most frightening moment of my life, because I thought, I'm going back to jail again. Now, my wife at this time, she's pregnant, and I'm going to have my first kid now. I want to go back to jail. No, I was looking forward to being a father. And so when they took me to prison, they took me to a holding tank at Harrison Division, which is at Dundas, just north of Dundas and Ossington, and I was in there. It's about 3 in the morning. It's on a Friday night, and so I know I'm going to be in there till Monday morning, probably, before I go to court. And I was in there with about 8 or 9 other guys. A couple were drunk, and it was just a terrible feeling. And I said, I'm going back to jail. About 3 in the morning, a police officer came down and called my name. He said, Jones, Charles Jones. I said, yes, me. I figured they were taking me to the Don for the night or a couple of days, and he says, you're free to go. Oh. I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, the guy you beat up was he's actually wanted on assault and battery charges, and not just here, in Buffalo and in New York, and he's also here illegally. So I was let go, but that was it. When I got home that night, my wife read me and she set it up for me to go to school. So, wow. And one very quickly, I didn't want to go back to school because I had, I didn't even finish public school, and she set me up with college prep. So I went to college prep, and then I got into regular college, and I excelled. I found out the one thing, I may be slow processing, but if I worked hard, I could overcome that. And so I just got focused, and I found out what I could do, and I did it. And I graduated from Seneca College, winning the Alumni Award, which is huge, the Premier's Award, and the Board of Governors Award, and with honors. So that was something that I never believed would happen.
Wow. What a story. Okay, Spider. Now, does this lead, you mentioned CHWO, right? This is the call letters from the, did I get that right? Yes. CHWO. How do you get that gig?
Yep. Through George Chiavello. George knew the program manager there. He pushed for me big time. And prior to that, he got me, George opened the door for me at, we did a TV show at Coast to Coast called Famous Knockouts. And George demanded the producers that I be his co-host with him because we had this chemistry. And so George and I did that show, and then I was telling him about how I wanted to get into radio, and he opened the door for me. Wow. To CHWR. I'll always be grateful to George Chiavello for that door, not just that he believed in me.
Wow. Now, okay, so, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, no. So you mentioned Bob Makowitz Sr. We got to say Senior because, of course, everybody remembers, anyone listening to the Fan 590 in your era there remembers The Game, which was this all-night show with George Stroumboulopoulos, Jeff Merrick, and Bob Makowitz Jr. So that was The Game. But, okay, so...
Another bright, brilliant young man. Yeah, those guys were, Bob Makowitz called me one day, and I'll tell you what happened.
Yeah.
When I was at CHWO, I still did some boxing stuff. And every time there would be a fight of note coming up back then, either Mike Hogan or Stormer Norman would call me, and I'd go on their show.
Right.
And so Makowitz heard me, and he called me in one day and said, how would I like to do a Sunday show? And it just evolved from doing a Sunday show to working the night shift. And so it was just a great gig. I was there for about 7 years, and they sent me to Las Vegas to cover the Mike Tyson, the Erie situation.
Right.
I went to Las Vegas. I flew there with my wife and, of course, Pat Marsden and John Derringer. We all flew together, and I covered the fight for the Fan.
You mentioned Mike Hogan. So Mike Hogan is a good FOTM, been on this program. You're now an FOTM as well, friend of Toronto Mike. So congratulations, Spider.
I like that.
So Mike Hogan, fellow FOTM, Mike Hogan wrote me, and you said this term earlier, and I wish I had called up this question then, but he wrote, when Spider brings the nitty gritty back to the city, exactly where is he getting the nitty gritty from?
It comes from the soul, man.
Of course.
You know, it's a funny thing. When I started that show at CHWO, I was on about a month and a half, and it caught on so quick with all the slang. Like, he's bringing here he is, your ever-loving, creepy-crawling local beauty on duty, the lovable one, Spider Jones. And I would say that, and I'd play that music in the background, then we'd come up, we'd do everything. And I was telling him I'm bringing nitty-gritty back to the city, Spider Jones style. That's just from the heart, man. It's just, I mean, we're gonna have a great time tonight. But it caught on. I get a call one day from Jerry Gladman, who was a senior writer with the Toronto Sun. He came out and interviewed me, and he did a whole page, and he put it there, Spider Jones brings the nitty-gritty back to the city. And it was just something else. I couldn't believe it. And I got a picture somewhere of me sitting in this leather jacket, leather pants with a band around my head. I had hair back then, with my feet up on the table, doing my thing, or my thing. I say no thing but a chicken wing. You know, we used to have, it was all the old sayings.
Right.
I used to have, like, we got enough gold to make Fort Knox look like a piggy bank. You know, you say, we play. And then people would send in invitations. I mean, they'd want to send out
requests,
all kinds of, dedications to one another. And the show really caught on. And Makowitz listened to it, and then he said he wanted me over at the Fan. So I finally went over to the Fan. And I liked that. And when I got to the Fan, that's when the whole thing started. The speaking. People started. I always shared my story with people. You know, I'm living my dream. I would tell them I'm living my dream. Man, I got people listening to me on a microphone, 33 stories up in the air, and I'm talking to people all across the city, across the province, and my show's going into parts of the United States, man, and I couldn't believe it. And my phone, all night long, that phone would ring. It didn't matter. And we had a lot of fun. So I had a school teacher call me and ask me to speak to some of his kids, and that parlayed into a second career. And that's why after a while I decided, you know what? I'm making more money out here speaking than I am in radio. And I'm turning people's lives around. And I found that was the most gratifying thing you can get is a letter from somebody saying, when you spoke to me, it changed my life.
Yeah, so good for you. I mean, you are an incredible motivational speaker. I said I was ready to run through a wall. Well, as soon as we hang up this call, I'm going to do exactly that. So, but I need some more radio. Just okay. So I was listening to you on the Fan 590, but what's why did you leave the Fan 590?
Well, I got a better offer. I got another offer from CFRB. No, 640. Talk 640. And it was, I liked the idea of going over there, and I could do the late drive from 5 to 8 o'clock. No more all night stuff. As much as I love the Fan, I got tired of doing just listening to people crying about the Leafs all night, or about their team, or about. After a while, you just get to the point where you want to try something new. And I wanted to get into talk radio because I'm a political animal. Right. And I wanted to get into radio and talk about other things, other concerns, other issues that concern us. And the money was nice. So I went over there, and then from there, but then they changed that to
Mojo.
And that just didn't work for me at all.
Okay,
it did not work for me.
Quick aside. So I recently had Ripken on the show. And Ripken was there for the launch of Mojo Radio, and as were Humble and Fred, who I produced their podcast today. So
yep.
It's funny, small world. But Ripken,
Derringer.
yeah, Derringer
Yep.
was there, and May Potts
Yep.
was there for the.
Yep, and there was somebody else there, I forget, but it just wasn't
Mike Stafford.
what I wanted. I liked it. I liked it till it went Mojo. I did not.
Right.
I found it offensive to women. I really did, and a lot of women found it offensive, and they told me.
It's funny because when Ripken's telling stories, he said he didn't realize it was going to be so risque and so Maxim magazine when he signed up for the Mojo Radio. He didn't realize, and he says he remembers like day one, the topic would be it. Again, this is his memory. How old were you when you had your first boner? This is the memory bank of Ripken remembering the start of Mojo.
I was about 10. No, when, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. I just, you know what? Because when I was over 640 before that, we had a huge female audience.
Right.
And so I just felt, I mean, it's the way I grew up, man. There's certain things that I just draw a line on, and I just didn't feel good about it. Here I am as a motivational speaker,
right,
trying to inspire men and women to a better life. And I just think that some of the issues there and conversations were just too risque for me,
right.
And I just didn't like it. Then I got and by then I'm really doing well as a motivational speaker. So I get a call from at this particular time now I get the Premier's Award for the work I'm doing in the community, which is a very prestigious award back then. I make the front page of the newspapers. The National Post does a whole 2-page section on me. I couldn't believe it. Here, this stuff's going on. The Toronto Sun, 2 different articles on me. I'm the Windsor Star, front page. So I get a call from Steve Couch. He is the program manager for CFRB. And he wants to do a deal with me. I said, okay. I'm in London at the time getting the award, the Premier's Award. And so I come back and we cut a deal where I'm going to work there. I'll do Sundays, the Sunday afternoon drive, I call it, because that's the cottage drive. It's very good. And the rest of the time, I'll fill in for other people, but I don't want to work 5 days a week anymore. Because it's starting to take its toll on me because I'm traveling a lot. Right. I'm working as I'm also at that time the ambassador of skilled trades. The Ontario government appoints me the ambassador of skilled trades, so they send me all over Ontario. As a matter of fact, I'm going all over the country evangelizing the skilled trades, which is. Between that and doing my other engagements, it's taken up a lot of time. So I ended up doing my Sunday show over CFRB and then also filling in. But it got to the point where one time I ended up working about 45 days without a day off, filling them for everybody all through. And I finally said, man, this is crazy.
That's
and then, yeah.
That's the domain of Roger Lajoie.
Oh, Roger. I did a lot of work with Roger.
Right.
Roger Roger was like me to fill in, but he knows his stuff. Roger and I have worked together off and on for about 25 years. Oh yeah, we started out actually working, I think, for Pickering Cable or one of them, or Ajax or one of them. Yeah.
Shout out to Roger Lajoie. So you're at 1010 at this point, and you're still talking to your Nighthawks. It's not necessarily about sports anymore.
No. That and that's the part I missed. They weren't more than the Nighthawks because I was talking to a whole different crowd of people than sports fans. And radio's changed too even since then. I seen the changes when I was there where now you're either left or right. It's like the newspaper. They're not going to hire very few left-wingers to write for the Toronto Sun. They're not going to they're not going to hire right-wingers to work for the Toronto Star. You know what I'm saying? They're going to you almost become a puppet.
Right.
I had people sending down stuff when I'd go in and out of my shows. I would always bring in, like you do, you bring in music. I'd bring in my soul and R&B, blue-eyed soul and R&B, because that's my style. I'd have the program manager sending down messages like, play something I know. But I knew my writing was on the wall when Steve Couch left and Ben Dixon came over. because he was there for a year and a half and never said a word to me. Not even, and yet it was. I had always worked hard for a CFRB. When they needed somebody to go out and do the mobile units, they always asked me to go because I liked interacting with the crowd, which was important. But I knew my writing was on a wall. I knew sooner or later that, and the fact that these major corporations were gobbling up these radio stations and letting go of good people. So between my youth center, which I had began, the Spiders Web Youth Empowerment Center, and the speaking engagements to working for the government through the correctional services and that, I really didn't need radio anymore. And then I guess it didn't need me because I come in one day and they decided they were going to take my show off the air, a show that did very, very well on Sundays. But I knew the writing was on the wall because once Ben Dixon came in, I no longer had the same deal. And I mean, I'm not knocking Mike. That was his call, and I wasn't one of the boys.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe you were Steve Couch's hire, and maybe when Ben Dixon came in, because you weren't his guy, he just sort of.
Yeah, well, whatever it was, I never had a chance to really talk about it to him. But he might. My heart wasn't really in it anymore, anyhow, and I think he brought that up too. He said that where I had no longer showed the passion. He was probably right because. I hadn't. I got tired of radio. Like I said, it got to the point where either left or right wing, and I'm neither. I'm just me. And, right. I thought what I brought to the air was a guy that grew up poor, seeing everything. I mean, I didn't just come there after reading secondhand stories and books. I saw police brutality, but I saw good cops too. I saw gang violence. I was part of it. I saw how I lived in poverty, racism. When you live in all those things, you bring to the lens or to the microphone a different perspective than some upper middle or middle class person with a college degree that has never lived the way I have. And I was getting some heated arguments on the phone with people when they would deny something they never lived, and it just got to the point where I got tired of it. And now I think I'm mostly just passionate about turning people's minds into, because what you think controls your future. How you see yourself. You're supposed to control your mind. Don't let it control you.
Well, Spider, even this conversation as we wrap up here, hearing your story here over the 80 minutes we've been chatting, like it sounds like when you have that conversation with Muhammad Ali and he's like, so inspirational in terms of, you got to chase this goal of radio, and you go back to school, you do very well, and then you find yourself in radio and you parlay that to the Fan 590, then you get a better offer at 640, and then you go to 1010. You did it, man. Like, step back, pat yourself on the back. You did it. That's three of our biggest.
I can't pat myself on the back. It's already sore. No, you're right. You know what I have a saying?
Yeah.
My father used to tell me this all the time, and this is true. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. In other words, in order to become what you want in life, two things have to happen. First of all, you have to have a game plan, and secondly, you got to be willing to make the sacrifices it takes. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. And third, and this is so important, Mike, nobody's born extraordinary. People become extraordinary. The people we look up to, Austin Matthews, it don't matter. Wayne Gretzky, it doesn't matter who they are. Anyone who becomes extraordinary, they become extraordinary through an extraordinary effort. They're not born extraordinary. And this is what I try to tell people. They're willing to sacrifice our youth. And that's the important thing. If you're not, don't waste my time or your time.
And that brings us to the end of our 1027th show. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. Spider Jones is at Spider_Jones. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewery are at Great Lakes Beer. Palma Pasta is at Palma Pasta. Sticker U is at Sticker U. Ridley Funeral Home, they're at Ridley FH. And Canna Cabana are at Canna Cabana _ See you tomorrow when my special guest in the backyard is Mike Wilner, and we'll be setting you up for your 2022 Blue Jays season. See you then.
Yeah, the wind is cold, but the smell of snow warms me today. And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine, and it won't go away. 'Cause everything is rosy and gray. Well, you've been under my skin for more than 8 years. It's been 8 years of laughter